Hi, my name is Bernard Rose. I'm the writer of the screenplay and the director of Candyman.
Hi, I'm Clive Barker. I wrote the underlying story for Candyman and produced the first and second pictures.
My name is Alan Poole, and I was the producer of Candyman.
Hi, this is Virginia Madsen, and I played Helen Lyle in the original Candyman.
Hi, I'm Tony Todd, and I love Candyman.
Hi, my name is Casey Lemmons, and I played Bernadette Welch in Candyman.
Bernard Rose. Well, we only shot in Chicago for a week. We did, but most of the exteriors are actually done in Chicago. Obviously, the helicopter stuff, which was actually some really nice chopper flying over downtown Chicago, which involved us rigging the camera directly looking down, which hadn't been done before that film. We actually got them to really change the helicopter mount to do it. I knew Clive. I'd met him actually while he was shooting Nightbreed at Pinewood Studios, and I had lunch with him. I was doing another picture there at the time, and I was introduced to Clive, and we got talking, but then I didn't have anything much more to do with him or anything until actually quite independently somebody sent me, in fact, another story of Clive's called In the Flesh that somebody had adapted and they were looking to do as a movie. But in the same collection of short stories in the Books of Blood, the story after In the Flesh, The Forbidden, and I read that and thought that was really a wonderful story, and had this really original and interesting kind of shape to it. So I contacted Clive and optioned the story from him, and then sold it to Propaganda, who then paid for the development of it. And it was actually, bizarrely, Steve Golan, who was the producer of Propaganda, when he bought it, and he just said in the meeting, "Hey, this is a great story. Well, who's going to write it? Are you going to write it?" And I just went, "Yeah." I needed the money, but actually the truth was I'd never written a screenplay before. I'd only directed. I love horror, and I love it as a genre, and that's why I loved Clive's books from that period, the Books of Blood, because the Books of Blood, it was where everybody is a book of blood, and wherever we're open, we're read. I mean, I think Clive was really onto something. I know at the time he was very obsessed with going to mortuaries and looking at cadavers and stuff like that.
Alan Poole. At the time I met Bernard, I was at Propaganda Films, and I was producing an original television series for them. This was in 1990. It was a series called Inside Out. It was, in its day, very, very successful. It was kind of an R-rated Twilight Zone. Steve Golan, who was the co-chairman of Propaganda, had just brought Bernard over to work on developing the script for Candyman. And he said, "Hey, Al, I got this guy. He's from England, but he's really talented. Maybe you want to use him on your show." So I met with Bernard, and we hit it off instantly. I hired Bernard to come on, and by the end of the second week, we knew we had a good rapport working together, and he gave me the script of Candyman to read, and I flipped over it because I thought it was brilliant. And he said, "I want you to come over and produce the movie for me." And so I moved from that little low-budget series right over onto Candyman.
Clive Barker. When I started writing about the Candyman, or thought I might write about the Candyman, it wasn't with a conscious sense of, oh wow, I'm going to be telling an urban legend at all. I don't think I would have even known the term urban legend when I wrote the story, which makes it doubly funny that since then there have been deconstructions of the story, academic deconstructions of the story, which are very much about how much reading I must have done and how much I must have known. And, this author knew nothing. It all comes from sitting at Grandma's knee while she tells you a story about not going into public toilets. This amuses me a little bit, but I know there are a number of very learned pieces that have been written now about the Candyman and the tradition of the Candyman, and in a number of pieces written by academics, I am taken to task for so nakedly stealing from the Black American tradition the mythology of the Candyman, which of course I haven't done. I invented the mythology of the Candyman, and I actually had to write to one of these professors in Chicago actually and say, I can't take this. Here's the history of the Candyman. I invented this guy. And she said, I thought it was all an urban legend, and it was just one that I hadn't read about. I said, no, wrong.
Bernard Rose. Candyman, in fact, I've noticed in more recent books on urban legends, is now credited as being the first film to exploit the idea of urban legends in horror films, which I think it was. It was actually a film called Urban Legend.
What's the deal? You guys doing a page on serial killers or something?
Something like that?
Clive Barker. An urban legend is a story which is passed orally. That is, it isn't written down until much, much later in his life, passed orally around a community, around a culture. Part of the power of these stories is that they are presented to us as real events. It happened that somebody, somewhere close to the teller experienced this.
Casey Lemmons. An urban legend is a story that goes around and people take it as true. Not only do they believe it, but they believe that somebody credible told it to them, that it actually happened to. They believe that they actually have some sort of direct contact with the story. You know, like everybody knows somebody who actually was drugged at a bar and woke up and they were minus a kidney.
Bernard Rose. The urban legend that most influenced me, that was not in the short story that I actually found in Chicago, was actually the legend of Bloody Mary. And if you say Bloody Mary's name in the mirror 13 times, she'll appear and do you. I borrowed that for the Candyman, and in fact, initially, to invoke the Candyman, and in fact, in the original script, you had to call him 13 times. And I think I was at the first read-through, and the first scene came up, and they had to say his name 13 times, and they're going, Candyman, Candyman, Candyman. And after about, it's like, oh my God, everyone's falling asleep. 13 was just a bit too many. You can't hear somebody say something 13 times, so I said, well, let's make it 5.
Alan Poole. Candyman tries to be a kind of compendium of the entire phenomenon of urban legends, and then tries to say, let's take this one and let's just say that it's true. Bernard was always interested in Virginia, but we did look at a lot of other actresses. I remember days of just young, pretty much unknown actresses coming in and reading for the role. And one of the ones, we finally decided that Virginia was the best possible person for the role and went with her. But had it not worked out, or had she not been available, among the young unknowns, one of the ones that we liked the best was this very lively young actress named Sandra Bullock, who we hadn't known anything about until she walked into the room. Virginia was discovered by David Lynch. I don't know if she told you this story, but she had sent a headshot in for casting on Dune, and that Lynch was, he makes his choices very, very instinctively. And it was off of a photograph of her that he had her come in and cast her as Princess Irulan.
Bernard Rose. I knew Virginia quite well before we did the picture. She's a very talented actress. She is a native of Chicago. At the time, she was married to a good friend of mine, Danny Houston. And so I knew her socially. I don't think I'd really seen her in very much. For me, I'd much rather meet somebody without having seen them on screen. Sometimes if you see people on screen in a role, it's hard to kind of view them objectively.
Virginia Madsen. Bernard didn't really see me as Helen. I had to kind of grow into that. Bernard saw me as being too beautiful. He knew that I was a smart woman, that I was strong, that I was from Chicago, that I was down to earth. But physically, he saw me as glamorous. And I didn't get it. I mean, I really, really didn't get it. I thought I was a pretty girl, but I didn't see myself as beautiful and glamorous. And I mean, I'm a Midwesterner, you know, it's not like we live that way. The first thing he wanted me to do was gain weight. I was very happy to cut my hair. I was like, cool, I've been waiting years to do that. But he thought I needed to look more real. That's what he wanted me to look real. So I, you know, certainly didn't want to put on weight. And so Bernard found this very sneaky way that, you know, that one of the first days of filming, he came knocking on my dressing room door at lunch with pizza. This is see, I'm not a cake and ice cream girl, I'm a pizza mashed potato girl. So he walks in and, you know, with a little tiny pizza, innocent enough, I was like, oh, I'll just have one. Okay, by the end of this movie, he was coming in with like 4 and 5 of these little pizzas, so it didn't take me long to look more real. Not only could I eat whatever I wanted, but I didn't have to deal with makeup and hair and all this fancy wardrobe. The only time they would put a little bit of makeup on me was when I was in trance. When Candyman would come and hypnotize me, we would put mascara on me. And we would put a little bit of lip stain. We didn't even put lipstick. We put a little bit of lip stain. And all the rest of that was lighting, just to make me look really, really suddenly like beautiful.
Clive Barker. Bernard liked this metafiction idea. He liked the idea that it was going to be a movie about horror movies. It was going to be a monster movie about monsters. And one of the great things about Bernard is he isn't shy about his enthusiasms. And it became very clear to me, and I'm not either, and it became very clear to me that we were going to have fun. We were either going to argue every hour that God sent, or we were going to have a lot of fun together, because he completely understood what I was doing and how I was playing with the material, with the whole tradition of horror fiction, and wanted to really, I think respectfully, I think he really respected the material, but he also wanted to make it his own thing, and I was very comfortable with him doing that.
Bernard Rose, his writing style is very elegant, it's very literary, but in terms of adaptation to any kind of dramatic medium, it's also a little problematical, because Clive does these rather elegant literary elisions of things that are by their very nature literary ideas. But in this instance, the kind of blurring of the lines as to whether the Candyman was really real or whether she imagined him, and whether it's just really a story about her becoming psychotic, was, I think, what was interesting about the movie. And although in the movie we absolutely say it's really happening, really, if you look at the film, it's quite clear to see that in a sense, it's a story about her losing her mind. You can interpret the story as then there being no Candyman. And I liked that about it, and I liked the creeping fear, and I thought he was hitting on something which really is a real fear. It's very hard to make the audience frightened of something that they aren't frightened of. And, you know, people are frightened of the wrong part of town, being caught in the wrong, you know, where there's going to be some threatening activity is going to come out and get them. And that fear is very real. And the fact that it's really in reality unfounded makes it more interesting, not less, because an irrational fear, in a sense, is the very fundamental building block of racism. And I think that the film, in a sense, then, given that, became a kind of rather subtle way of actually exploring what is really the dark heart of American history, which is a country built on slavery.
Tony Todd, whether it was conscious completely or it was one of those accidents that just works subliminally, you know, he created a framework using America as a background and America's history of racial politics to this horror figure.
Casey Lemmons. What we experience currently is based on our past entanglements, which is something that I think people forget, that there is kind of an exploration to be made of our ancestral traumas, you know, that this could kind of come up and come to the surface now, you know, or we are haunted by it. I think that's what it's saying. We're haunted by our past entanglements. The Candyman is born of extreme racism against him. And so he takes kind of that hatred and has turned it into, it's become a part of his monstrousness. And so I guess that's saying that we are breeding monsters, you know, we are making monsters by our past hatred. And we're responsible, you know, we're responsible for the Candyman. We're responsible for the monsters that we create.
Cabrini-Green was, it's a real housing project just south of downtown Chicago, just by the Gold Coast, where there had been a, the place had become really suffered from the most extreme kind of urban blight, and you had large numbers of people housed in there who were living in pretty appalling conditions in terms that there were like gangs in the neighborhood that would essentially make it unpoliceable. It was a dangerous place. It was a place where people would get shot for no good reason. It was inadequate housing. It wasn't kept up properly by the people who were supposed to be keeping it up. It was obviously a ghetto. There's no other way to describe it.
Bernadette was very clear that the movie needed Cabrini-Green because we needed to feel the reality of all of this. The power of the movie, I think, is increased hugely by the fact that we were able to actually be there and shoot and show the way these places are constructed. I could take you to places in Liverpool which look exactly like Cabrini-Green, and I think they probably all came from the same time period, 60s and early 70s, when cities were moving people out of the centers, out of places of urban decay. Thought that it was a really smart idea to build these places where you would put people in a perpendicular arrangement, as it were, and you would cure all kinds of urban problems and violence and so on by simply doing this. And of course, it didn't work. It was a monumental disaster. It was a sociological disaster. It was a architectural disaster. And in the case of England, it was very much a structural disaster. We had 2 or 3 of those places which simply collapsed. This place I think called Rowan Point.
The people who stand outside the building, it was their building. It probably wasn't a good idea to put different people outside the wrong building and that kind of thing. Police were secured the place for us, and they had sort of dealings with local gangbangers and whatever. It went pretty smoothly.
Alan Poole. We did shoot at Cabrini-Green for a couple days when we were in Chicago in terms of entrances, exits, and the climbing of the stairwells to get to the apartments. We worked very closely with the Residents Association there. We had a predominantly white crew, and they were skittish because they were a local Chicago crew. They lived in Chicago, and this was somewhere they had never gone because they would be afraid to go there. And here we were with all of our trucks and very highly visible, and we had followed a lot of specific instructions about where to hang out, where not to hang out, where to park, where not to park, what hours to avoid.
Casey Lemmons. Cabrini-Green was particularly notorious, and you just don't know from what you see in news flashes or kind of what you hear what you're going to find. But we found, families, people just trying to survive, people with nice apartments, some better than others, and little kids, beautiful little children. When we were shooting in Cabrini-Green, we had to take this certain elevator up, and Virginia and I, would have to go, and of course we'd be escorted, but there was a guy, brother, that was hanging out, and he kind of took on the role of our guide and decided that he was our protector, and he would kind of take us up and down.
Virginia Madsen. Maybe in another era, the huge mansion on the hill or the broken down house at the end of the lane, those were, the terrifying places you'd avoid. Now in our modern day, the places that, regular suburban people avoid, the nice people avoid, the inner city.
Bernard Rose. At every stage, really what I was trying to do was get as many documentary and accurate details to support the movie, because I think the moment you have a movie that has a supernatural aspect, you have to be as pedestrianly realistic as possible in order to get the audience involved in it. And otherwise, if you start, if they'd have gone to this block of flats and it was all gothic and, the kind of crappy blue backlight you see in bad 80s movies, then who would care? So there's a ghost in there. But so we wanted the housing project to be, and the details around it, A, it's a real place, B, the way the murders happened is real, and C, just the details of the life and the architecture and all that were as accurate as we could make them. There was a killer who that architectural flaw of the bathroom cabinets just butting up to each other and in fact being a way that you could actually enter somebody's apartment was completely real, and it was a flaw of those housing projects.
Clive Barker. I think that Bernard did well to get all that he could, all the value that he could out of that reality. There are things, I wish we could have been I wish we'd had a little bit more money to make some of the stuff look a little bit more real. The stuff which is on stage. The interiors, those don't look too real to me, unfortunately. But it was a relatively cheap movie, and we did what we could with the money.
Ellen Poole, in the late 80s, the mayor of Chicago, had, in an attempt to show how committed she was to relieving the blight of the projects, had gone and moved into Cabrini-Green for a week and lived in an apartment in Cabrini-Green for 1 week. And it was a great publicity stunt. And it got a huge amount of attention, but it also focused attention on Cabrini-Green as the, supposed worst place to live in America, because in our collective imagination, those are the deep, dark places that you never want to go into, and you figure you'd go in and never come out again. And so it has become the haunted house of our mind.
There was no question that at the time it was a scary place. Now that they're knocking it down, they're in the process of demolishing Cabrini-Green. I think one of the reasons they're knocking it down now is because the real estate is valuable, and I think they probably wanted to knock it down for years and expand the downtown south of downtown Chicago.
In Taking It to America, Bernard went deep into the projects and he went very seriously urban and into the life of the predominantly African-American community that lived inside of Cabrini-Green in Chicago. He picked a setting that was already deeply scary in the minds of many Americans, and then exploited it for horror in a way that did not exploit the people who lived within the projects.
Tony Todd. I remember they took us to Cabrini-Green as a tour because I wanted to go in there and see what it was like. I remember talking to some of the residents, and they said to get all their stuff done before 10 in the morning. Got to, because there were like 4 to 5 different warring factions of gangs surrounding the place as if it was in a fortress. We're talking about myth where somebody was also able to tap into community fears and use that fear as if it was a living entity. I mean, that is also a very special part of the story. But Cabrini, I felt really, it was a horrible thing. I mean, I grew up, on the edge of other housing projects, but nothing like that. And I was a single kid, so I remember having to, I loved to read, and I used to have to smuggle books and put them on different routes on the way home so that I could double back and get them. That was the value to me of my education, as opposed to joining a gang.
Bernard Rose. My whole definition of the horror film is this. The difference between a horror film and an action film is that in an action film, it's all about who you sympathize with. In an action film, you sympathize with the killer. That's why I don't make action films, because they're immoral as far as I'm concerned. An action film is about how many people can you kill? How many bad guys? But who designates who's good and who's bad? It's a moral judgment I personally find I'm uncomfortable with. So I don't like action films. I think they're really made in the main to help gun manufacturers show their wares, and I don't make them. In a horror film, on the other hand, you sympathize with the victim. And in a horror film, it's all about waiting to be killed. And it's all about trying to stay alive, which to me seems a much more human objective.
Clive Barker. I think it's great that horror movies, which are very often treated as the lowest of the low in terms of what their content can provide for an audience, can often be very rich in terms of their subtext.
Virginia Madsen. There are themes in this movie. It's not just that they were going on at that time, but they always were and they always will. Los Angeles, the heat was building, and things were getting worse and worse and worse, and we all knew it. The Rodney King tape was played on the nightly news, and nothing was done about it. And everybody was outraged. There was a trial, and the verdict was not guilty, and the city erupted into flames. And our chief of police was at a fundraising dinner against Proposition F, which was to make a committee of civilians and police to investigate the police department. Basically, that's what it was. After things began to settle down a little bit, after several weeks it took, I started to think about the film again and wonder if it was going to be released or what the reaction was, and I think that's why I took particular delight in people being shocked by it. I was sort of like fresh from a really serious debate in my city, and so I kind of liked the timing of it all.
Casey Lemmons. It's kind of interesting to present a film at that time where there is so much angst going on, and perhaps we are dealing with, in some ways, ancestral trauma, reprocessed tension, something that's been around for a long time.
Nobody thought it was a good idea. Oh, why are you casting, can't cast an African guy as that? No, no, no. Which, to me, it was like saying you couldn't have an African man play Dracula. It's, in itself, an absurd thing to say.
Just the base fact of this being interracial, that made some people very uncomfortable. I love that.
There was a genuine fear that we were going to have, mass demonstrations and fist fights and worse at the cinemas where the thing was showing. I feel as though the folks of propaganda didn't read the sophistication of the core audience well enough, didn't realize that the core audience, the black audience, was going to actually completely understand how this character was on their side. And this is a bit like saying that, somebody who's Scottish is going to be offended by Macbeth. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
Tony Todd. There's so much guilt in America and in corporate America about what's, a perceived indignity that people are cautious and afraid. And you got to have a group of filmmakers that have balls and are courageous enough to say it doesn't matter, to try to transcend. I think we're just frightened, both groups. African Americans and white America. We're just something that we don't want to address.
Bernadette Rose. I developed the whole backstory of the Candyman, which again obviously wasn't in the story because the story is set in Liverpool, and the idea of him being this kind of very kind of sophisticated Civil War character who was not a slave, but who was a very, an artist and a kind of a wealthy man. His father had, the whole thing about the manufacture of shoes, I mean, it was actually research I'd done. There was a character there was an African guy who did make a lot of money doing that in that period.
Casey Lemmons. I was telling somebody the story, and a white person, and they said, well, that's ridiculous because, everybody knows that, slaves couldn't have come up with, the pattern to make shoes, or he had some history that was very dignified and had an invention, or his father did. And my grandfather invented the first clock radio, So I said, well, actually, there's a lot you don't know. And so I thought it was kind of really smart of Bernard to bring that in to his, pathos, this character, what he'd been through, and, that he had kind of a rich history.
Alan Poole. I think the boogeyman genre is a very venerable part of literary traditions. The really good boogeymen all have tragic dimensions. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, for example. It goes back earlier than the 19th century, I would say, but the more recent examples come to mind, or even up through characters like Boo Radley in To Kill a Mockingbird. Our literature is strewn with boogeymen because they mean a lot to our psyches. Usually the boogeyman is a tortured character. Same with Mr. Hyde, same with Boo Radley. All your really good boogeymen have been turned in, they're trapped inside their own evil because of horrible things that have happened to them. So in building the past for Candyman, I think it was the logical course for Bernard to have made him the victim of some horrible abuse, and given the time when he grew up and given what the atmosphere was, it just seemed most likely that he would be a victim of racism.
Tony Todd. Granville T. Candyman was an artist. He was a painter and turn of the century, and that's all he really wanted to do was to paint. And he thought that he could live a sheltered and separate life from what else was going on in the world, and discovered to his chagrin that he couldn't, and fell in love with a white woman, and subsequently was punished for it publicly, and had his arm, the most important thing as an artist, removed. And therefore the spirit and soul of Candyman was established.
Virginia Madsen. I think that there's something seductive in that gothic way about a phantom like Candyman. The sort of the side of us that wishes that Dracula could run off with his lady friend, and that he would sort of climb into your window one night, and you would willingly become his partner throughout eternity. The fact that we love Frankenstein, we understand he's a monster, but we pity him and we want him to be okay, and we're sad when he falls into the sulfur pit at the end of the story. Candyman is really ultimately good. That's, he was a good man that was done wrong, and he became evil through no fault of his own. That's the same with Dracula and Frankenstein, and even the werewolf. I mean, it wasn't his fault. He was bit, and so he kills and he ravages, but it's not his fault.
Bernard Rose, Alan Poole got us a meeting with Phil Glass, and we talked about the movie and about urban legends and the characters and this and that, and he got really into it, and he asked how we wanted to do it. It's very, very sparsely orchestrated. Organ, piano, and voices that sing wordless choir, a wordless choir. And Philip basically went, not writing to picture, but having seen this earlier sample, he went away and wrote a sort of demo to kind of Candyman suite, which we then cut up and used to cut the film to, which really helped. So instead of us showing Philip a completed picture and he wrote the music to that, we had his music while we were editing it, which was a lot better way to work. I think too often what happens is that they lock picture on these movies and they give some guy 2 weeks to come up with the score, and that's why all the movie scores sound the same, Philip's a real composer, and he wrote this beautiful contrapuntal little themes that wove in and out of each other, and really, really excellent music. And then, he said, cut up the music how you want. So we cut up and dealt with it and put it together. And then he took those re-edited versions and reorchestrated them and recorded them with a choir and and the piano and the organ. And that was basically the score. And because of the way it was done, I think he only saw the film the one time, the very early assembly. And then after the film was finished, Philip lives in New York. He went to a screening in Times Square, and I think there was a very noisy audience in there of people who were getting into the movie and yelling back at the screen. And it completely horrified Philip. He was like, my God, this is a horror film. And I don't think he'd ever really understood it in that context, and he was kind of a little taken aback. And I think in an odd sort of way, a little bit embarrassed because, he was more used to being working for the opera or working for very arty projects. I think he's somehow felt like we'd conned him into writing the score for a horror movie, but he shouldn't feel that way because it's a bloody good score. In Candyman, the score is never during the frightening sequences. It's performing on a psychological level, and all the scary sounds are natural sounds and things that come out of the mix. So you're not expecting them or waiting for them in the way that you are with these traditional horror scores where they kind of, I say they just have the low A, and then the spiky noises. And I'm like, so cliche. Philip's score is one of the really unique things and really added a lot to the movie.
Casey Lemmons. Cabrini-Green, I mean, to kind of make a strong statement about monsters in Cabrini-Green is a little bit controversial, because we saw a lot of families in Cabrini-Green and, and no monsters, really. But it is a way of giving a kind of, of making a mythological statement about something that is a fear, a fear of the unknown.
Virginia Madsen. There's a lot of statements in this movie about racism and some things that make people really uncomfortable. A lot of people had arguments over that movie. They still do. So it really pushes buttons. I remember I was having dinner with some women, and one woman of color brought up Candyman and how she just loved this film, and she was telling me this, and I was like, oh. The other girl didn't recognize me as Helen. And she was also a woman of color, and she began to bring up how this movie was the most racist. I mean, this idea, and the two of them got into this fantastic argument about whether it was racism, whether it wasn't, and sort of halfway through the discussion, the woman sort of went, oh, I'm sorry. And I was like, no, this is great, continue, and so it was great. I was able to really hear this argument.
I think it had a big audience, which is something that you never really know when you're shooting it. It always makes a difference in cinema and television when an audience that really is a movie-going audience gets to see themselves represented in some way. When I was growing up, you really didn't see very many African Americans represented in television at all. Even though now we're used to thinking of it as being better, it's still very much a progression. It really still hasn't matched real life. It's really total dysfunction not to represent the population. I mean, I think it's a crime, actually. And so I think all the films that I acted in, and certainly the films that I make as a director, it's so important to show different representations, different kinds of characters.
Tony Todd. We had Blackula, right, with the great Famulus, and there were a couple others. As a matter of fact, Oscar Michaud, who was a pioneer black filmmaker, has over 60 films. I think he tried one. But I knew I wanted to give tribute not only to horror icons, but other African American actors who, whatever limitations, didn't get to finish a film or complete it or have a frame from A to Z.
Bernard Rose. The violence of American society comes from the massacre and theft of Indian lands and the use of slave labor to build a country in the wilderness. And in a sense, that's what gives rise to this fantastic, gleaming metropolis of Chicago. But it's the dark underbelly as well. That's one of the things that's lovely about the horror film, is because you can address things like that.
We'll get you out of here right away, kid.
Alan Poole. More than anything, it's a great story about great characters and a situation, and it's very scary, and it creates its own mythology. I don't think the film is intended to be any really pithy statement about American history. I think that it's intended to stand on its own with a world that the film has created that happens to owe some of its past to some of the uglier sides of our nature.
But now that he's locked up, everything's gonna be okay.
I mean, to me, it's pretty basic. This guy was an artist. He couldn't do what he wanted, and he was a victim of a mob lynching. And his spirit was so strong that he refused to He refused to die. He was a man that had that incident not happen with his arm. You know, he was someone who was destined to lead people, but was doing it selfishly by choosing to be an artist as opposed to a leader. I don't even show up, you know, like 45 minutes into the film. I think I counted my screen time at one point. I think it's less than 8 minutes, but I'm talked about.
You haven't eaten already, have you?
No, of course not.
I thought it was very interesting the way that the Candyman really was somebody that she had invoked by her disbelief. As it were, she proves that he doesn't exist, so he's compelled to turn up. She really caused him. She is the trouble. It's her that's doing it. She goes in there and like, as it were, demands that this creature show himself.
Clive Barker. Bernard was interested in using hypnosis on his lead actress to get her into a state of mind that would photograph particularly well in close-up so that she would have this kind of galvanized trance-like look.
I really felt like this was like Dracula and that I should be in this kind of trance of love or whatever it was, but that he had this supernatural power. Otherwise, why wouldn't I run?
It's quite a spooky thing, putting someone in a trance, because, you know, they're in a trance. They obey. Good way to have your actress, though. I thought, if Werner Herzog's done it, I'm going to try it.
Bernard seemed to have a very clear vision very early on for what this picture should be. I was never a fan of the coat, but we were going to have the coat.
In order for a film to work, in order for chemistry to work, you know, you're only as good as the person you work with, and if a person is open, sometimes it creates a hotbed for magic.
I had a psychic one time told me never be hypnotized because your subconscious will open and all kinds of dark things will fly in. She was right. It just put me into this really intense state of relaxation. And my eyes would get really glassy. My pupils would dilate. So I was not faking it. I mean, he was really able to put me into this trance. And as the film went on, sometimes we would do it not just for a Candyman scene, but, you know, I think we did it for a couple of other scenes. And where he just wanted to have that kind of look in my eyes. So eventually he was able to do it very quickly. You know, in the beginning it would take about, you know, 10 or 15 minutes sitting on the corner of the set somewhere, and we were really careful, and I'd be let in, and the crew was really quiet, and they were like, I mean, the crew was very tolerant of us. But then, when they started to see the way I looked, they were like, okay, this is really going on here. And then he was able to do it pretty much, we didn't have to go someplace special. He was able to pretty much do it on the set over in a corner, because once he would start hypnotizing me, I couldn't hear anything else. It would almost sound like I was listening to a seashell. And pretty much the only thing I could hear was Bernard's voice. And as this is going on, in my mind, I'm like, I can't believe I'm doing this. This is the silliest thing I've ever done for a movie. But yet it was happening, because you're cognizant, you're aware. You're not asleep. So I was like watching myself do this, I was fascinated.
Alan Poole. It was a fascinating process, but a process that was very taxing on the crew, that we'd get ready with a setup, get lit, get ready to roll, and then Bernard would come onto the set. It usually wouldn't happen somewhere else. Come onto the set and then make everybody stand completely still and nobody speak. This is a working crew, while he spoke very softly to Virginia, and usually took about 20 minutes to talk to her, and to get her into the state where he was ready, and then he would whisper, roll camera, and we would go, and there was no yelling action, no clapper, no nothing. And I think we got some wonderful stuff out of it, but in my own mind, I think that was our own kind of urban legend. If we had to go several takes, he would just talk to her very softly. We would all stay, after he would go, cut, and we'd all have to stay very quiet. And then he would go and talk to Virginia again. And then when he was finally ready to check the gate, which is what we say when we're going to move on to the next setup, he would come over and bring Virginia out of it. She seemed to get to a point in the course of the filming where she would go in and out pretty easily.
Virginia Madsen. Being hypnotized was not a good place to be by the end of the filming. And, oh man, it just was, it became not normal towards the end. And Bernard kind of knew it was time to put away the old swinging gold watch. I was pretty worried about the strip search scene, but I knew I wouldn't be too badly abused because I really trusted Bernard and I knew that I was safe. The strip search in general is something that frightens everybody, male and female. So we both wanted to make sure that this scene was particularly horrifying, that it was particularly brutal, but that I was particularly safe so that I could really lose it emotionally. The first thing that Bernard asked me was, well, who do you want strip searching you? I think it should be your best friend. And it turns out that my best friend is Rusty Schwimmer, and she's a great actress. Having the safety of my friend there, my lifelong friend, allowed me to just really to dissolve into a pool of tears. I think we only did like 2 takes. When it was done, and I was so surprised that Bernard shot it so quickly, you know, which was much appreciated, because he's such a pro in that way. But no one could hug me because I was covered head to toe with sticky Hershey syrup. And I smelled from the sticky fake blood. It kind of smells like real blood because it's slightly sweet smelling because of the Hershey syrup. So and I couldn't put a robe on because the robe would stick to me. So they sort of stuck towels in front and back, and people walked holding them on either side of me, and nobody could hold me. And I was really shaken up after that scene. Yeah, that was really hard.
Anne-Marie McCoy returned to her apartment.
For me, as much as I really love Tony's performance in the film, it's tough once he actually shows up. It's always tough in a horror movie once you reveal the villain. That's why sequels are impossible, because you know who it is from the start, so there's no suspense. She hears a story from the cleaning ladies, and then she hears, a story from somebody else, and from the professor, and then from the little boy, and the stories get closer and closer to the source until they're totally disproved, and then he appears. It's that whole thing of building up and building up and building up to an entrance. And once the Candyman has appeared, in a sense, the film changes in a rather fundamental way, and to some degree becomes a less successful movie, I think. Not because it's just very hard to go anywhere once you cross that line and go, right, now we're dealing with a supernatural character.
I'm sorry we can't take your call.
It's hard to suspend disbelief beyond that point.
Clive Barker. I had wanted to create this monster that was aware of itself as a monster. I am a legend, It would be seductive because it would be this powerful thing that moved through not only the imagination of the character, the lead character, but also through the imagination of the culture. I think you can reasonably say that monsters do that, particularly movie monsters. They appear for a period of time and really seize the collective imagination. Freddy Krueger certainly did that. Obviously, the Linda Blair character, Pazuzu, the demon in The Little Girl in Exorcist, absolutely did that. There was a period of time when that was being taken terribly seriously, and people were being possessed right across America, it seemed. This becomes a very interesting sort of two-way process. The community embraces the monster. The monster, in turn, transforms, becomes new, becomes fresh in response to having interest shown in it. And sometimes, regrettably, and actually most often regrettably, the monster becomes a comedian in response to that interest. Though the monster may have begun as terrifying, it will end up being the court jester. That hasn't happened to Candyman yet. It hasn't happened to Alien. It'd be very difficult to imagine it happened to Alien, actually, but it's happened to just about every other monster, going back to the Universal pictures of the 30s. It's almost as though once the monster fails to horrify, and it will fail to horrify simply by being exposed. If you show it often enough, it just isn't scary anymore. Then it's silly. And if you take away its power to scare, then you're stuck with a guy with bolts through his neck, or, you know, a guy with a fedora who looks like he's got a pizza on his face, or, you know, the guy who, you know, ran into Coons and nailed a whole bunch of nails to his head. I mean, these are fundamentally silly images once they no longer have their scary effect. And so it's easy to see why they should become ludicrous. For a period of time, something magical happens. There is this relationship between the audience and the monster, which is really rather wonderful, in which the audience says, "Come on, scare me," and the monster says, "I'm ready. I'm ready to do my worst." That's what I was trying to write about, in a way, was that Helen is calling forth the monster by her very doubt, by going into this community and saying, "Oh, this is nonsense. This thing can't exist." She calls the thing forth, and the thing says, "Now do you believe?" This whole exchange that goes on between the audience and the filmmaker. It's a deal that's being made. It's a bargain that's being made. I will scare you if you will allow me to scare you. When you think about it, it's a very strange bargain, because to be really made to be afraid is not particularly pleasant. But it's something that we as a species seek out. We seek it out in theme parks and, you know, with fun fairs, and we certainly seek it out in the cinema. And we are drawn as a species to seeing these things, having these experiences. When it plays and when you watch, then you're with an audience that's playing with you. There's something very fun about that. You know when a comedy's working because the audience is, you know, the cinema is shaking. It's the same with a horror movie. If it's working, you know it. The audience is, you know, yelling and screaming and just having a great time.
The audience, you look at, why do you think reality TV has completely raped the drama schedules? Because no one wants to look at stuff like Dawson's Creek anymore. Nobody wants to see, you know, people all coiffed and lip glossed up, and it's ugly. It's not real. They've seen reality now on TV too much, and on the internet. You start messing around on the net. Everything is so much more explicit. They're not going to be able to maintain the kind of MPAA controls on the content like that.
The censorship bodies tend to believe that the people who watch horror movies don't know the difference between reality and fiction, and are likely, therefore, to act on all kinds of possibilities that are suggested by these fictions, because the poor, deluded social innocents don't realize that this is just a story. And there's always been the sense somehow that horror fiction was enjoyed by people who were a little less smart than, the average movie that's playing the Lemmons 6. This is a nonsense. Horror movies are enjoyed by all kinds of people for all kinds of reasons. And actually, I think they're very often a genre. It's very often a genre which offers lots of levels of potential enjoyment. Certainly for the first half of the movie, you could almost believe that this is a woman who isn't getting enough love at home and has invented a lover of her own and called him the Candyman. This idea of forbidden love, finding some manifestation that is both monstrous and romantic is something which, you know, comes up in obviously Dracula. I think what Bernard did was really sort of change the rules, invert the rules, allowed his characters to play a kind of mock romance, supported hugely by what Philip Glass created musically. That was one moment horrendous and the next moment romantic.
This movie isn't just about race. It is also, you know, a love story.
When he's seducing Helen or attempting to seduce Helen into his world, he says, you know, we will be, if you come with me, we will be legends together. You know, we will be tales that are told to hushed children. We will be stories that are exchanged between lovers in whispers. That's the writer saying how seductive it would be to be eternal. Helen eventually, I think, falls for the deal that the Candyman offers.
Your death would be a tale to frighten children, to make lovers cling closer in their rapture.
Casey Lemmons. One of the things that made Candyman one of the best acting experiences of my life is just the incredible friendship of Bernard and Virginia and I. I mean, we did everything together. There's a very interesting synergy that was happening with Bernard and Virginia and I. You know, we totally clicked. We totally clicked. We were all kind of wacky, you know. And Bernard's, you know, wacky, and we just kind of hit it off. And I think that was probably part of it. I probably auditioned for Bernard, and we looked in each other's eyes, and it was like madness, you know. Helen, honey, it's Bernadette.
Alan Poole. When Casey comes face to face with the Candyman, at one time, so Bernard decided, of course, when anyone comes into contact with the Candyman, they're hypnotized. So, and that took a little longer, I think, because it was her first time and she was very nervous about it. But yeah, it's basically one really frightened close-up reaction shot that Casey has where she's hypnotized.
You don't want to be the best friend of a heroine in a horror movie. It's like you don't want to cough in a period of movie. It's sudden death. Her function is to die. So Casey has to die, and she dies beautifully. I remember her getting her makeup for the sort of disembowelment, and her bemoaning that her mother would, oh no, this isn't why I became an actress.
I think that the biggest challenge was wearing the prosthetic. You know, the Candyman kind of slits me open, and that was the biggest challenge because it was so terrible, and I had to wear it, you know, for a day and lay in a pool of blood, and nobody would talk to me. It was so awful looking that nobody would speak to me, and I was lonely, you know, but Virginia was the only one that would come over and talk to me, and, you know, we'd share cigarettes. I was friends with everybody, every department, you know. The makeup artist was my friend, and she's fabulous, and we kind of had fun with it as much as possible. But once it was all put on, it was upsetting. You know, it was upsetting, and it was very hard to look at. And so, you know, everybody that wanted to talk to me, but you couldn't look at it. And I thought that was kind of the most challenging thing, was to be in the prosthetic. As a matter of fact, I was going through a scrapbook with my assistant, and we came to those pictures, and I have a Polaroid of it, and she couldn't look at the picture. And I'm like, I was laying around in that, you know, in a pool of blood. And for me, I've got to say, it's kind of fun. I mean, there's a morbid part of me that enjoys that as an actor, you know. But at the time, it was kind of lonely. I mean, it was really like nobody could look at me.
Virginia Madsen. Philip Glass's music is so mesmerizing that it's like being hypnotized. I mean, it sort of draws you into this other world, and it puts you into a very particular frame of mind, and you just kind of stay there. And of course, that's why it works so well for the hours. You know, it put you into the state of mind, almost that those women, you could feel where they were. And in Candyman, you just kind of went into my head.
Do you understand?
Bernard is like, you know, he's the maestro. I mean, you're just willing to do anything when you work for this guy. And You know, I was fascinated because as an actress, I just was becoming more and more involved in this process, more involved in my character. And, you know, Bernard is very involved with his players. You know, he takes everybody by the hand, and I really prefer working that way. And so I felt like I was working with a truly great director. I wasn't working with just some crazy young guy.
Alan Poole. Bernard is a tremendously exuberant spirit, and he doesn't know a lot of boundaries. He's one of the cleverest and most resourceful filmmakers I've ever worked with. He has a knack for knowing how to solve problems, knowing how to get shots efficiently, knowing how to deliver what's needed for the editing room economically. Bernard he's actually an extremely efficient filmmaker, and he's great with actors. Bernard had said to me before we started, he's very proud of the fact that all of his films up to that point had always finished on schedule and on budget. So that he's saying, give me the latitude to express myself as I feel it on the day, because I won't sink the film, I won't become uncontrollable, I won't go over budget and over schedule. Bernard on the set is a very live person and a very powerful force, and when he's happy, he's completely infectiously happy, and the whole world can share in his glee because there's so much of it. And when he's not happy, he makes everybody pretty clear that he's not happy.
Bernard Rose. The key scenes between him and Virginia Madsen are almost absurdly, now looking at them, like they're shot like love scenes. They're not shot like murder scenes.
Just one.
I really do think it plays on all that stuff because he's this huge black man and she's this petite, you know, very blonde white woman, and it had this great, you know, it was a great kind of situation. It was very provocative.
His attack is openly sexual. You know, he has basically this sort of huge cock on his hand. And he kills people by sticking it in them, in their orifices. That's part of the appeal of the movie. I think that's partly why people like it. That there's a pervy angle to him. And certainly I know, last time I saw Tony, he said that I just asked him if he minded being like associated with the Candyman, and he just started laughing, and I think I know what he meant. It had seen him all right.
We had a sequence in the movie which was an extended romantic moment for the Candyman and for Helen, which Philip Glass done a really beautiful score for, which involved the two of them dancing together. It appears in the movie in a truncated form, and the audience just didn't, the test audiences just didn't want to buy it. They just didn't want us to allow the monster that much comfort. There was a moment, there was a viewing at the studio when we looked at the picture in a pretty rough form, and you suddenly had that feeling, wow, this is really going to work. As he started to put the picture together and fill in the missing effect stuff and just sophisticate the picture, we were showing it more and more, and I was seeing people really, really scared by the movie. I don't know whether Bernard would say this. I would certainly say it about Hellraiser. I was not conscious how it was really achieved. I was not. I was not as smart about it as you know I would like to claim. Maybe Bernard had a very smart sense of how he was achieving everything in Candyman, but I think there was also a sense that he was flying by the seat of his pants and it was working and he didn't know how it was working. And I think so often in our, whether you're writing a poem or painting a picture, when you're really going, when you're really flying, you don't know why it's working. It's happening for some reason. There's a kind of magic to it.
We've been stabilizing you on a heavy dose.
Alan Poole. We financed the film from propaganda and I guess Polygram. That was during the period when Polygram was becoming very involved with propaganda, and ultimately propaganda became part of the Polygram film label. So that provided the financing for the film, but we did get our distribution deal with Columbia TriStar, and they released the film theatrically and also handled all the home video. We had a really good weekend. And the film actually, at the time, it went on to grow, the film cost $7 million, and went on to gross in its first run, $26 million domestic, and then did a lot more overseas. And that was really good for a horror movie then. At the time, I think it was the highest rated of any of the Polygram produced films, with the exception of Truth or Dare.
We made it for a tiny amount of money. They did it basically on a video deal with Columbia TriStar. They had an advance for the video with Columbia TriStar Home Video.
I think it was a sort of delayed thing. I mean, we opened well at the time, and then when it really kicked in was when it got its cable life, I think, and the rental life.
The sequel was a very painful process. It was a painful process because when you first make a movie, nobody really knows what it's going to be. Everybody's sort of playing this a little bit cautiously. By the time you come to do the second picture, everybody has a theory, because the first picture's out and everybody knows why it worked. Everybody lives in a state of fear in the industry, and I think sequels make people even more fearful than the first movie. There's a kind of conservatism that comes out of success.
I know one thing.
Everybody that has been involved with the Candyman legacy all came to the table with the best of intentions. There hasn't been any creator that didn't do their job, is what I'm trying to say. And I appreciate everybody, from the writers and directors and producers and production team to the fans, that have kept Candyman alive. And he won't die. I would like to see a descendant of Candyman played by me. Professor at a small college, perhaps. And he's been denying this linkage, and somehow it gets revisited through the investigations of a new student. Something can be explored about Candyman having to come back to battle an evil that may be perceived as greater than he is. You know, I want to explore some heroic things, and then, you know, a cataclysmic battle. I'm a big kid, so one of the most fortunate things that I've been able to do with my career is to play characters that I grew up playing when I was in 8th grade. You know, like I've done my astronauts, I've done my aliens, I've played horror figures, cowboy westerns. You know, I mean, it's like it's an extension of that thing, and I think the greatest joy of an actor is to play.
I think Tony does a great job of being a wonderful villain, but at the same time bringing a level of nobility and sort of weird heroism to the characters.
Tony Todd's performance, which was spot on, I think. He absolutely had that kind of elegance about him, sophistication. And he's very sad. There's always a tear in his eye. And he's tall and very statuesque, and really, I think he gave a terrific performance, and a lot of it was his voice and you know, and his physical presence.
His language is slightly higher flown. I think he speaks more like a 19th century character than a modern character in many ways.
It makes it more horrible, in a way, that he's so dignified.
Tony's a fan of kind of science fiction and that kind of genre material. I know he'd been on Star Trek and other things, so he was. Some people have a problem like playing that kind of a character, and they don't quite know what tone to hit, because of course it's not strictly realistic. It is a little pulpy, but Tony had that kind of line to take with something, he'd take it very seriously.
Please be home, Trevor. Please be home.
I think the important thing about Helen as a character is that she's in an unhappy marriage. She's looking for something that's going to engage her. She's sort of feels trapped, I think. And although she kind of shifts the blame onto her husband as him being the one who's unfaithful, in a sense, if you look at her from the very beginning, she's kind of slightly dislocated from her marriage, from her world, from whatever. She's looking for something. I think her character is pretty simple in that sense, in that there isn't any real anything beyond what you see in the movie. One of the things that's nice, again, about horror movies is they do happen very much in the present tense. So it's about existential things. Her sitting there in the bath, feeling uneasy, her getting a beer out of the fridge, her just walking around, taking pictures. I really wanted to try and keep the audience being with her in the present tense throughout the movie, because that's the easiest way to create suspense. She's trying to solve a mystery, and she's trying to write a paper, and she's trying to do that to prove, you know, her annoying professor wrong, and to, you know, to succeed in the academic way that she wants to with her thesis and all those things. But I think in the end, that's not really what's driving her. What's driving her is some sort of thrill-seeking thing in the end. She wants to kind of confront something. And I think that in the end what she wants to confront is really something that's inside herself. In that the only logical explanation for the film is that she committed the murders.
Virginia Madsen. I really played it as though Candyman were 100% real. And I believe that he was in our story. You know, that was sort of Helen's downfall, was that no one believed her. They just thought instead of climbing into the mirror, she was climbing into madness. Everyone else involved outside of Helen's mind is really seeing this as a slow descent into madness. I don't see it that way, because there's just things that she couldn't have done. And smashing through the window at the, you know, after he disembowels that was a Freudian slip, wasn't it? After he disembowels the psychiatrist. I don't think that's something that she could have really gotten away with without more, you know, evidence. I really wanted to do action. I wanted to do action and adventure. That's why I did Highlander 2, so I could do action adventure, you know, just for fun. At first, I was a little bit nervous. I was a little scared. I was pretty sure that Bernard would take care of me. But then again, Bernard's a bit mad, you know, and I thought, God, you know, I don't know. He's gonna really make me do all these really insane things. This was a long shoot. I mean, and the movie got sort of darker and darker and darker, and, you know, we all got more and more exhausted, and it was like, you know, Bernard running around twirling his hair going, more blood, more blood, more blood. I mean, it was just like, we were all imitating him, more blood, you know, and he was just fascinated by this. And every day there was more blood, and it was getting to be around the holidays, and everyone was really tired, and there was blood everywhere, and every day there was somebody screaming, somebody getting disemboweled, me getting hypnotized, and we had to have like I think we took about a week off because it just got bad. You know, we all had to walk away for the holidays. We finished on Christmas Eve, and we came back right after New Year's because everyone needed to walk away. That was the only time. It was about a 2-week period where it just got very bad. One anecdote was that, you know, how into this film I was towards the middle. We were working these very, very long hours, and I called home. My then husband informed me that tonight there would be 8 for dinner, which was then my cue to become Laura Petrie, and I would stop at the grocery store on the way home to do the shopping. And so I went into this grocery store it was already night, and as I'm in the checkout line, I'm putting my things down, and I'm noticing that the girl is going, and she goes, excuse me, but are you okay? And I go, yeah, sure, I'm fine. And then I realized that I had all this dried fake blood all over my hands. I'd washed like really quickly, but I was tired and I had to get to the grocery store before it closed. And then I realized that it was after the Candyman had sort of cut me with his hook, and I had this long scar and all this blood running down my neck, which was now all dried and caked on and in my hair, and was sort of smeared down here. And I completely forgot. I was just like, I was so exhausted and so tired. And I knew I couldn't get it off till I was home in the shower anyway, but I'd completely forgotten. So I really scared that girl, because I was like, yeah, I'm fine. What do you mean? Oh, this is a movie. That's what I said. Oh, this is a movie. And she went, okay. And I mean, I was just gone, and I just left and went home. Poor girl.
Candyman's lair, that huge room, was a set. It was an enormous set that we built, filling every inch of a stage at Occidental Studios in Los Angeles. And we had other sets. We had Helen's apartment and the bathroom, in the Cabrini-Green apartment, and the sort of portal through, and the tunnels that led into the lair where the candy was, and everything. That was all another set.
What we built was really no exaggeration. Yes, we painted the big mouth of Candyman on one of the walls, but you know what? That's what those apartments were like. There were tunnels going between all these apartments, and all these burnt-out apartments and abandoned places where there was just squalor all over the floor, and nobody did anything about it. There was no building management that came in to fix things up. I mean, and, you know, these people were blamed for having no respect for their property. But you know what? There was like about 2% of that population who did that damage, and the rest of the people couldn't do anything about it because they were gangs. So there was a lot going on there, and the whole thing was so political.
It's hard for me to go places, really, still to this day. Some days I wonder whether I should have fought, because we did talk, Vern and I, about disguising or doing something. And ultimately he said it should just be you. The character will always be part of the canon of my work, but I mean, hopefully, and because of my strong theater background, and because I have some fingers in several different pots, that it won't be the template, the tabernacle of my career, but it is a big part of who I've been allowed to be so far.
Surrender to me now, and he shall be unharmed.
Alan Poole. We all had to spend a lot of time with bees. And we hired Norman Gary, who is still, even now, the #1. He's the go-to guy for bees. Virginia didn't have to work with the same number of bees that Tony did, but it was the same thing. I mean, Norman was always there. He was very instructive. He was really great with the actors, and would explain to them how to behave, how not to behave.
And I learned a lot about them, and he starts slowly by like pouring bees on your hand, and you're like, bees! Oh. And so I just started like really liking the bees, and they're covered with fur, so they feel like little Q-tips. And the more I was educated on the bees, the less afraid I was. And so by the time we actually got to filming, I wasn't really scared at all. I wish I could tell you that I was like, stricken with terror every time it happened, but I wasn't actually. I had a good time.
He's a really physically pretty repulsive character. I mean, when he opens his chest and the bees come out, and all you see in there is the cover of the Tate & Lyle can, which is referenced in that revelation, because there's the cage of the lion's carcass, as it were, and the bees are contained inside him. So Bernadette made an explicit reference to that. He, in revealing himself like that, he shows us that he is physically repulsive. At the same time, that's in the middle of a seduction.
Tony's job was just a little bit more difficult than mine because the bees that were on me were less than 24 hours old, which means they don't fly. They can sting you, but they're less likely to. But Tony had flying bees, which are older and more aggressive. And even though they're away from the hive, they're confused, and they were put inside his coat. Thousands and thousands of bees crawling around inside a coat, if you can imagine the terror that would be involved. And they wouldn't let me be in that part because of my bee allergies.
You're really supposed to work with bees like before 10 in the morning, and you're not supposed to provoke them or keep them contained for too long a period of time. The coat was problematic because they were in there. And when I opened it, they went nuts, you know? So I got, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4. I'm not gonna exaggerate the number on the first one. It was the second one that I got in trouble.
Bernard Rose, the Africanized bee, had migrated from South America, which of course is much more dangerous than the standard honeybee that we were using. And once they'd infiltrated the population and crossbred, there was no way of knowing whether you had honeybees or Africanized bees. And Africanized bees will just, as a swarm, just keep stinging, and like they'll all attack you, and you can be killed. You can just get too much bee venom, and you can die from it. But so I actually don't think you could do the sequences the way we did them now. And now they just bring in that CGI, and you know, let's face it, folks, CGI looks so phony. I mean, it's going to be like The Blight, the late 90s, early 21st century films are going to look so dated in 20 years with all this really cheesy CGI work that goes on in films now. The bonfire outside the apartment complex and the fire makes a lot more sense in an English setting because the bonfire is about Guy Fawkes' night. Guy Fawkes was the first terrorist. He was this guy who wanted to blow up the Houses of Parliament when the King came to open it. Because he had he was Catholic and they were Protestant, and it was all part of that whole thing. He had all the store of powder underneath the House of Parliament. He was caught before he could set it off, but he got very close to doing it. And they tortured him to death and burnt him alive on a bonfire. And ever since then, on November the 5th in England, they celebrate what's called Guy Fawkes Day, where little children build an effigy of a guy. This man was actually called Guido Fawkes, and they burn and they trundle the effigies around and asking people for money, ask for a penny for the guy, and then at the end of it they put the effigy in the bonfire and set it alight. So in a sense, the whole ending with the Candyman and the people in the bonfire made more sense in an English context.
Guy Fawkes is an interesting figure because we burn him in effigy in England on the 5th of November. Remember the 5th of November, gunpowder plot shall not be forgot is the rhyme that children sing. The leaders of the plot, particularly Guy Fawkes, were horrendously tortured before being horrendously executed. And for their crime became part of a kind of legacy, a kind of urban legend. Little kids in England make Guy Fawkes dolls, which we then cart around. I don't know if this happens so much now. I suspect it doesn't happen so much now. It certainly happened when I was a kid. I spent a long time creating these things, full-size, monsters. Cart them around, begging for pennies to buy fireworks, so you eventually had enough money to buy fireworks with. The image of building a huge bonfire. I remember going, from house to house saying, can we have old clothes? Can we have old furniture? And we would build this bonfire over a period of weeks. We had a field behind our house, so we could build this bonfire steadily. And then we would have a big seat, and the more sort of regal and impressive the seat could be, the more terrifying it would be when you eventually put your Guy Fawkes doll on that seat, bound him to it, and set fire to him. This is all the stuff of childhood. Of course, it's gruesome and terrible. And you know, Guy Fawkes is a real person. The account of his tortures are truly terrible. I had used the Guy Fawkes event as a nice background because it gave me my bonfire. Just in dramatic terms, it gave me a great excuse for a bonfire in the story. But there's also this wonderful sense of a character who is being ritually destroyed, and the interest that we take in such ritual destruction as an audience. We go to monster movies to watch that ritual destruction with the sure and certain comfort that however complete that destruction may seem, the monster will be back in the sequel.
The bonfire shoot went quite smoothly. We did it all in an open lot up near Valencia, and we had Virginia, and then we had Virginia in her burn makeup, which was pretty fantastic, and then we had our stunt people, and our stunt coordinator on the film was Walter Scott, whom I have worked with repeatedly since, who had just finished doing Backdraft. And so we knew our biggest stunt challenge was the fire. And so we thought if we could get the guy who did Backdraft, this is actually a piece of cake to him. And there was just never any problems. Everything, the safety issue, the coordination issue, the shooting of it, it was one of the more difficult things on the film that actually went completely like clockwork.
Commend to Almighty God our sister Helen, and we commit her body to the ground.
What was really challenging about most of this film for me is not being touched. I mean, whenever I was covered with blood, you know, when I had blood on me, or when I was insane, or when I was hypnotized, or when I was all burned, you know, people don't want to touch you. There were many, many scenes, and it got worse and worse as the film went on, that the crew was kind of like, And that was weird for me to be separated from my crew, you know. I'm always like really bonded with the crew. They're sort of my lifeline, and that was removed from me during this film. I was completely separated from the crew. And so I really felt isolated and alone. And I think that Bernard loved this because that was very much like what Helen was going through.
One of the biggest logistic challenges that we faced is in the funeral sequence, which was shot in a cemetery in LA, where we needed the residents to come, the people from the community come, and they throw the candy on the grave, and we see a long line of people waiting to come. And we had tried to, we needed a large number of extras, and more than we could really afford to hire. And so we tried doing a promotion, which is something I've done on other films, which has worked, where you promote through radio and flyers to the community, and people come for the day and work as extras, and then you have several really large items like a car or a big, huge TV, or that will be raffled off. So it's come and hang around the set for a day and get a chance to win something big. And we offer other incentives as for people who just want to come. And on this particular day, we had been assured by the extras coordinator that we would have 500 people, and you know, we had about a third of that. And this is where Bernard's ingenuity as a filmmaker comes into play, because we had to keep moving the same people around to make it look like a big crowd. And I think the sequence actually sells itself quite well, but we were all losing a lot of hair because we kept waiting for the other busloads of extras to come, and then it became clear that, you know, the sun was moving across the sky and nobody else was coming, and we had to just get in there and make a relatively small number of people look like a lot of people. And this was in 1991, when you didn't have the easy digital resources to say, oh, let's just shoot the crowd against a blue screen and then we can multiply them and put them anywhere. We didn't have that at our fingertips.
There was an original ending to this movie where the camera goes through the Candyman's lair, and it goes through this crack in the wall, and I'm in the wall, and I'm inside basically a giant beehive, and I had 3,000 bees all over my phantom head. And then my eyes open and I've become the Candy Woman. That was the only time it was really hard for me, because once the bees are on you and they're loving you and they're worshiping you because they think you're the big queen bee. The hardest part is after they say cut, because they're only filming you for a couple of minutes. Then they say cut, and Norm comes in with the bee vacuum and very sort of gently starts vacuuming them up. Well, the bees were getting very warm with all the lights and everything, and I was getting more and more warm. And I started to get a little bit panicky because it took about 45 minutes to get all these 3,000 bees off of my head. And they were starting to go down my neck. And because I had begun to sweat in my slight inner turmoil, the glue started to come loose on the costume and the bees started to go down. Oh, God. I felt so proud of myself for what I had done. And they cut that out of the movie. And they filmed a new ending, and I was so angry. I was so mad.
Studios love action films and hate horror films. They hate horror films because horror films are much harder to make. Why do you think there are so few classic horror films? Why do you think when you get a good horror film that's a classic, it stays in the marketplace for years, for generations? I think there are 3 reasons for that. Number 1, no one over the age of 25 can bear them because they know they're going to die once they're over 25, and they don't even want to think about it anymore because it's too much their daily reality. 2, they're much harder to make because they're about silence and waiting and slowing the movie right down, almost to a grinding halt, which are things that take a lot of cinematic skill and take a lot of skill from the actors, and you can't do it, if you get a good stunt coordinator, a good second unit guy, anyone can make one of those action films. They just throw money at them, and they get one of those big beefy twits to stand on the mark, and they mat his head onto the stuntman, and that's an action film. Bob's your uncle, you're away. I don't want to make thrillers. And I don't want to make, PG-13. PG-13 horror. I mean, come on. Any of you out there watching the video, if you see PG-13 on the box, don't rent it. Because you're not going to get scared. You can't be scared by a PG-13 film. That's for kiddie winks. You need to be scared. Which means you need to have a sense of complete abandon to the film, like the really frightening films, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's frightening because you don't get the sense that they were all like eating craft service in between shots and having their hair done. You feel like they were out there in the backwoods with some evil bastards. That's what you need. You need a sense of terror. Ever since then, I've been trying. I've had numerous projects trying to make other horror films. And developed them over the years, and there's always been the same response from the people who were supposedly going to make them or not going to make them. And you know what that response is? Ooh, this is too horrible. Now, if I was making a comedy, you wouldn't say it's too funny. I want to make these films for the horror fans, with gore and guts and viscera, and I want you to know that when you come to one of my horror movies, that it's not going to be a thriller. And it's not going to be, no one's going to kiss and go, I love you, Mum, I love you, Dad, at the end. No one decent is going to survive to the end of the movie. They're going to be opened up, spilt out on the floor. And I think there's a gap in the market for real horror, for horror fans.
This is Casey Lemmons. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it.
I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. This is Clive Barker signing off. Thank you.
This is Alan Poole saying thanks so much for listening.
This has been Virginia Madsen. Thank you for watching Candyman.
Thank you for listening, and now I'd like all of you to get up from where you're sitting and go to the bathroom, look in the mirror, and say after me 5 times, Candyman, 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 Candyman. Oh, you didn't, did you? Well, then you're on your own. Sorry.
Hi, Tony Todd. Sweets to the sweet. Candyman. 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 Candyman.
The preceding commentary was produced by Jeffrey Schwartz and the staff of Automat Pictures.